Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Mountain State edition of the Raising Cain Show. Today we're joined by Chris Pritt, former representative for Kanawha County, 030 or 53, right? District 53, I think.
That is correct, Nate.
He is the deputy majority, or was the deputy majority whip in West Virginia, House of Delegates. And as a leader in the legislature, Chris has worked tirelessly to advance the policies that protect the rights of West Virginians, foster economic growth, and defend individual freedoms. In this episode, Chris and I are going to discuss two key issues that are vital. And we really got to get into these things because a lot of people don't understand them. And they're things that came up when I was running for Congress and talking to folks. And I had some of these things I'd never even heard of. One of them is civil asset forfeiture reform and why it needs to happen. And then the other one is something called the certificate of need. And a lot of people don't understand this, but it's very, very important, especially for our health and healthcare industry here in West Virginia. And so we're going to get into that. And I think, I'm really excited to have you on, Chris, and I want to thank you for, for your patience. Folks, I know I normally start the show at 6 p.m. and it's my fault. So we're going to jump into this without further ado. So, Chris, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your background and, why you ended up going into the state legislature and then, kind of transition from there into, these two issues and what you hope, people will be able to take away from this conversation.
Oh, sure thing, Nate. Well, and again, just to begin with, I'd like to thank you for having me on this show. I really appreciate your work. You're a clear defender of liberty here in the Mountain State and throughout the country. So I appreciate you having me on the show. It's a real honor. Well, in terms of my background, by trade, I'm an attorney. I have been practicing law for the past 18 years. In 2007, my wife and I started Pritt and Pritt, and we have been representing individuals throughout Southern West Virginia and up into North Central West Virginia on a variety of issues. My wife was recently elected to the Kanawha County Family Court. And so at this point, I'm a sole practitioner. And but one of the things that we've really put an emphasis on in representing individuals in court, as well as my time in the legislature, has been standing up for the freedoms and liberties for all West Virginians. That was the primary reason that I ran, along with economic growth. It was to protect individual freedoms. That's something that I found that really gets neglected a lot of times in the legislature up to this point. And it's something that I think we really need to prioritize going into the future. And so I think if we can do that, we're going to put West Virginia in a much better place. I mean, I think that's what the founders wanted. I think they wanted us to stand up for individual rights and freedoms. And that's what I worked to accomplish while a member of the legislature.
And I appreciate the work that you did and the things that you were focused on. I 100%, feel like the main purpose of government is to protect our rights. That is the whole point of government. Anything beyond that, if it becomes the focus, it's a problem. And so one of the things that you have, been on the forefront of dealing with is civil asset forfeiture reform.
Yes.
And it is such an important issue for West Virginia. And of course, there have been challenges. And so, as somebody who, is obviously defended people in court, I'm sure this issue probably has come up a number of times, and it's probably why it is at the forefront, one of the issues that you were working to, to fix. Tell us about kind of the history of it here in West Virginia, and what has changed and what still needs to change,
Well,
and what it is for people who don't know.
oh, sure. So civil asset forfeiture, it's not as common in West Virginia compared to the federal government and in some other states, but we still have it.
Mhm.
So basically, what civil asset forfeiture is a process by which the government can take your property without you being criminally charged. So, for example, in West Virginia, if there's a drug-related crime and the state somehow believes that your property was involved with it, regardless of whether you're charged, they can actually seize your property. And it's a very, very low standard. So let's say that you've got somebody who's going down the highway, there's a traffic stop, the law enforcement decides that they're going to search your vehicle. They may or may not have probable cause to search it, but they see a few $1,000s in your vehicle. Well, to me and to most people, that might not necessarily be something that's normal. Okay.
Mhm.
I don't carry around that kind of cash, but some people might choose to. Well, if they find a basically a scintilla of evidence, a very, very low standard, they find a basic reason to take that money, they can. And what happens is that a civil action is filed against the property. So in other words, the action is not filed against the individual. The action is filed by the state against the property, and they can seize it. And so the standard for that is what we call a preponderance of the evidence. It's a very, very low standard. It basically means something is more likely than not to be something that's out there. So, for example, if you're in criminal court, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. If you're in civil court, the standard is a preponderance of the evidence. Well, a lot of times, what the situation you have is the state comes and they file the action against the property. Let's say it's $3,000. Well, to that person who's had their property taken, it's not, I mean, they're not going to have the resources to fight this in court. I mean, it's the attorney fees are going to be well in excess of
Right.
$3,000. So a lot of times what will happen is the property will be taken. It might be the money, regardless of whether the person's charged. The property will be seized, and there's some sort of deal worked out so that the state might take $1,500 of your money. You
Wow.
haven't been charged with a crime. They don't have enough evidence to charge you with a crime, but they take the property anyways. And
This
so,
sounds like an issue that's very similar to another one that came up when I was on the campaign trail, unfortunately, way too often,
Mhm.
which is parents having their children taken away from them, through, through a CPS without any due process. I mean, like they hadn't
Right.
been convicted of anything, they hadn't been even charged with anything. And I met a woman who, basically was, put through the ringer and lost, custody of her two daughters,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was just absolutely, a tragic situation. But it sounds very similar in that here you have basically people being penalized without any kind of due process.
Mhm.
Another example that I think of is, if you were, I remember somebody once, this was back in California, but I remember somebody was crossing over the border, coming, from Mexico back into the US, and they had driven down there and, we're doing some shopping or whatever. And it was a friend of mine whose brother had borrowed his car, and his brother had left a marijuana bong in the glove box, unbeknownst to him. He had no idea about it, but of course, he gets arrested, at the border. The car gets impounded, and eventually, it comes out that it didn't belong to him; that it was his brother's. His brother had, some prior history with drug use. He tested negative on any kind of drugs. He submitted to, drug tests and all of that, and he was not able to get his car back because it
That's
had
right.
been, impounded, and sold. By the time that they got through everything, they had already sold off his car. And so he it was so, you know uh, uh just unconstitutional is really the word that comes to mind, because we have constitutional laws that are in place that, that are supposed to protect our right, freedom of, search and seizure, but also due process laws.
That's
So,
right.
how
Well,
did these things come into play, despite the Constitution, which is supposed to protect
Well,
us?
statutes have passed them. Statutes have passed these laws over the years, and it's gradually expanded. If you
Hmm.
look at the federal government, there are probably hundreds of laws along these lines that allow the federal government to seize property. Okay, in West Virginia, we just have a handful. There's mostly it's for drug offenses, but there's also one
Hmm.
related to hunting. And but other than that, there aren't a whole lot in West Virginia, but it happens from time to time. It's actually there's a movement across the country going on right now to try to reform this, not just in West Virginia, but throughout the country. A lot
Hmm.
of liberty-oriented legislators are attempting to pass legislation to place limits on this. Now, I've
Yeah.
introduced legislation that I thought was very, very reasonable and common sense. And in the West Virginia legislature, I passed legislation that essentially said you can still do it, but only after conviction.
That
To me,
makes
that's just
sense.
common sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody was actually going to be committing a crime and they're using their vehicle to do it. And for example, it's related to the drugs. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
let's just take a common sense approach here and say the state can still do it, but you first have to convict the person. I mean, that's all the bill I proposed did, and I faced quite a bit of opposition. Each year I would introduce it, and I could not even get it to be presented before a committee. Oftentimes it's up to the committee chairs to actually put it on the agenda. It would not be placed on the agenda. A lot of times, what'll happen is you do get some pushback from certain individuals who, and a lot of times it's really unfounded. A lot of times people think that somehow this is stepping on the toes of law enforcement, but
Hmm.
for the vast majority of the people in law enforcement that I talk to, they're okay with this reform. They're
Hmm.
perfectly fine because it's not an attack on law enforcement. It's just a common sense reform that we can do to make sure that people's property interests and individual liberties are protected.
Now, that brings up a good point. When, let's say that, the police do a stop, they catch somebody, with drugs and in their car, and it's, enough drugs that it looks like they're planning to, to distribute.
Hmm.
This is something that's been commonly used, with the FBI, with the DEA, and other federal law enforcement agencies, where they confiscate, these vehicles. I mean, they've got massive websites dedicated to, to selling off these assets, right? Where
Hmm.
people can purchase them, in auctions. Is that similar to what happens when the state is involved in that kind of asset forfeiture? Are they taking these items and then they, auction them off?
Yes, or they just use it. I mean,
Okay.
it's really up to the individual agency to decide what to do with it. But yes, generally speaking, that's what'll happen, and they'll
So
just take the money from it and use it for various reasons.
these don't get sold off and then the money goes into the state treasury. It's going to whatever agency was involved in the arrest. Is that
That's right.
typically the case?
That
Okay.
is correct.
So I remember, I worked for the FBI for a while, and I was not an agent. I was a cybersecurity contractor. But
Mhm.
one of the guys that I worked for told me a story about him going out into the desert somewhere, out west,
Mhm.
and he was sent to some location, and they had a warehouse basically full of Lamborghinis and um, all kinds of other sports cars, Porsches, you name it, that had been confiscated from drug dealers and things like that.
Yeah.
And and I have to wonder, um, if you don't have some very strict checks and balances in there, to protect the rights of citizens. Because let's just face it, even if somebody committed a crime, if they committed a crime, but maybe that particular asset, or maybe the bank account, that they share with their wife or whatever, had
Right.
nothing to do with that. Um, by taking something, from that person, Where's the line drawn? Where, in your opinion, where should it be drawn? Because obviously, if somebody commits a crime and let's say they make a whole bunch of money because they were selling fentanyl, I think that's
Sure.
a fair assessment to say, hey, we can trace that money came from drug deals. So
Mhm.
I think
I
it's
think they
fair to
should have,
compensate
yeah,
them.
I think they should have
Um,
enough evidence to convict. I mean, I think
yeah,
that's where the line should be. If they have enough evidence to convict, or the person pleads guilty, which means they probably had enough evidence to convict. If the person is found guilty of the crime, yeah, let's take the vehicle.
hmm
But if they don't have a basic level of evidence to actually convict, then no, it shouldn't be taken. I mean, because all it does is it just incentivizes agencies to take people's property.
exactly.
Yeah, and that's a real problem, and I think it's just ripe for abuse. And now certainly I will state that the vast, vast, vast majority of the individuals working in law enforcement, the rank and file, are are good, hardworking Americans that love the Constitution. I mean, I think that's the vast majority of people in
Sure.
law enforcement.
I certainly think that to be the case of most people, working in law enforcement in West Virginia. The
Absolutely.
people I have met in this state, and it's the reason I chose to move here, largely don't want the government in their business.
Right.
They want their freedom. They want to live free. That it's in our in our motto. So that is the attitude of most West Virginians, and I think most people would agree with this. So what is the holdup? What are the most common objections
The
to these reforms?
the most common objection I've heard is that it is going to get under the skin and upset individuals working in law enforcement. That
Mm,
is the number one concern. But when it comes to laws like this and reforms like this, what people have to understand is that when we're passing laws, it's not just for right now. This is
mhm.
just for the purposes of posterity. I mean, we're
Right.
talking about passing laws for law enforcement agencies and others who are working in government in 15, 20 years from now. Okay. Because,
Well, and
and
that's a very
that's,
good point. That's a
Mhm.
very good point because the fact is that governments change, and we've seen
Yes,
that. This is why like executive orders by a president, for example, are great while they're in power, but then the moment they're out of power, if there's no law to back that up,
right.
the next president can just go and change it. We just saw that, with Biden, over the last 4 years, basically undoing so many of the things that Trump had done that the country wanted, and now hopefully he'll be able to turn that around. But it's really important that the legislature, back these things up with laws because we want these things to be permanent. And one of the things that I think is extremely important, especially for legislatures to think about, and it speaks to exactly what you were just talking about, is the unintended consequences of the laws that we have. If there are laws right now that allow for an unconstitutional taking of our property, maybe right now we don't have a lot of bad people in law enforcement utilizing that to abuse that. But who's
Right.
to say it will be that way 20 years from now?
Well,
Who's to say that? Yeah.
well, I was going to say too, and a lot of people, a lot of the legislators that I talk to will state that, well, my local prosecutor has never abused this. So, and that could be the case.
He
That
might
probably
not be
is
the,
the
the prosecutor 10 years from now.
case. Might not be the prosecutor. I mean, who would have imagined 10 years ago that the federal government and individuals within the federal government would have gone after President Trump the way they did,
Yeah.
and the way they've done over the past so many years. It's been completely outrageous what they've done with him. And those are individuals that are abusing the laws that are on the books. These are laws that they are abusing, that they are misconstruing, that they are misapplying, that were
hmm
put on the books 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so it's important for us to always have a forward looking outlook when it comes to the laws that we pass, just so
hmm
that we protect not just individuals like President Trump. I mean, he's the president of the United States. If they can do that to him, just think what they could do to you and me.
Yep, absolutely. And we've seen that. I mean, that has been, unfortunately, we've seen it a little too close and personal, with the weaponization of the FBI and some of the other federal agencies, the DOJ. I want to get into talking about the certificate of need and
Mhm.
next, because that's something else that really caught me for a loop. I had never even heard of such a thing. But before we do, I've got to cut to a commercial break to continue to be able to pay the bills here. And
right.
so when we get back from the break, we're going to get into that and talk about that. So,
All right,
folks, stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break.
It says, I woke up this morning and looked out the door to a country I don't recognize. They put masks on our face to hide our pain, and there's no fire in most people's eyes. And it's still true today. It's still true today that they've tried to destroy the American spirit. And in some instances, they've done a dadgum good job. But in other instances, they have lit an inferno in some people. And we right now are gathering some of those people that are on freaking fire to save this country.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain Show Mountain Edition. I'm here with Chris Pritt, and we've been talking about some of the issues that are going on here in West Virginia and the standpoint of the legislature. Before we get back into that discussion, I just want to make a comment about the last commercial you guys saw. So a buddy of mine who, and I say buddy, but the truth is actually I had interviewed Glenn Baker, a country singer, on my show about a wonderful song and music video that he had done. And we got to talking, and he was telling me that he was working on a documentary. He's somebody who has been really through the ringer and had been put in prison for 72 days before he was even given access to a lawyer, was never read his rights. Eventually, he was exonerated. But after he got out of prison, he lost his business, lost his car was repossessed. Just his health, went downhill because he had caught an infection while he was in prison. And it's just that his story is one that people need to hear. A lot of people know my story about, as being a federal whistleblower, really against the FBI and the things that I've gone through. But there's a lot of details most people don't know. And a lot of those details are in there. One of the things that happened was during our discussion afterwards, Glenn asked me to be a part of that documentary. So folks, if you go to finishthisfight.us/Cain, two things will happen that'll be really great. One, you're going to find out, you're going to be able to access and rent this video. It's $10.99, but in doing so, 50% of the proceeds are going to go to help a veteran who's lost his ability to walk, be able to walk again. That's right, 50% of the proceeds we are putting aside to buy a exoskeleton to put a former soldier into this to be able to walk. The other thing that happens is we get a little bit, it's not a lot. I think we get like $4 or something like that. But out of each person that rents this video, it comes to our show, which helps us to be able to, like I said, continue to do the things that we do. It's not free to be able to, run these types of services. And so this is one way that you can help contribute to the show. And the other thing is you'll be able to hear my story as well as Glenn's and several other really great people. We've got Alan West on there. We've got myself, of course, Glenn Baker, but also Tig Teagan, who was one of the survivors of Benghazi, and Craig the Sawman Sawyer, who has been, fighting against human trafficking, and so many other great people on here. Ivan Rakelin, who's been defending, folks down in Washington, D.C. over the January 6 issues and really taking the task the injustice that has been going on because of that. So folks, check it out. Again, you'll see it scrolling across the bottom of the screen there. So if you've forgotten where to go, just look at the link there and check it out after the show. All right, back to our discussion. So right before we went to break, we were talking about this term certificate of need. I
Mhm.
had never heard of it before. And but one of the things, and I love West Virginia, but one of the things that has just been very frustrating about West Virginia is access to healthcare.
Right.
It seems that like if you want good healthcare, you got to go up to Morgantown, and that is it's unfortunate, but there's just not enough hospitals. There's not enough medical services available. And as I was talking to people and driving around the state, this issue of certificate of need came up multiple times. So I'm going to let you explain what that is, and why you believe that they harm the healthcare industry and ultimately the people of West Virginia.
Sure thing. So certificate of need is a process, and it's a body of laws that started to be enacted back in the 70s. And the whole idea behind the law is that what we should be doing is putting up certain barriers to make sure that competition is taken out. In other words, what happens with certificate of need laws? And again, many states have gotten rid of their certificate of need laws. What you have to do is, if you want to start any kind of healthcare business, with very, very few exceptions, we've been trying to, over the past few years, reform it. But overall, generally speaking, as a general rule of thumb, if you want to start some sort of healthcare related business in West Virginia, you have to get the permission from the government. So it's not like you're starting a restaurant, or you're starting um, a barber shop, a auto body repair place. For the vast majority of businesses in West Virginia and across the country, if you want to start a business and you have the capital to do it, you can do it. You don't have to petition the government to get permission to do it. Well, there's an exception to that concept in the West Virginia law, and in many other states. There are some states where there are no certificate of need laws. For example, I believe in Texas, and I think maybe even California, they don't have this process. So what happens if you want to start a business where you want to provide MRI services, or you want to provide some other healthcare related business? You have to petition the government. You have to come up with thousands of dollars in an application fee. You have to justify to the government that somehow there is a need. There is a need for that particular form of healthcare business. And what happens, Nate, is you have obviously competing businesses that are going to be working against you, your competitors. Let's say you've got somebody whose rates are out of control. They're going to be working to make sure that you don't get approved. And that's a real problem. I mean, this whole idea is completely against the principles of having a free market. And we don't have that when it comes to healthcare in West Virginia. And I think that's a real problem.
Let me ask you something, and I'd understand if you can't answer, but I'm just curious from the standpoint as a legislator. When I see things like this, immediately red flags go up to me, because I think this is the kind of stuff that leads to bribery. Government officials saying, "You want us to, approve your thing? What are you going to do for me? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours." And it's not always a bribe. Sometimes it might be, some other benefit. But I don't like these types of laws because they're monopolistic, right? And who's the person that's going to make the judgment as to, which business should be able to operate? It to me, it leads to higher prices. It leads to, it's price control, but in the wrong direction. And I think about, I do think about these types of laws as being really kind of antithetical, to our antitrust laws, because this, in a way, is a trust that is being, put forward by the government and regulated by the government. And I do see a problem with that, because I'll tell you what, I lived in Japan for 3 years. And everything medically there is controlled by the government. So if you want an MRI, or if you need dental work, and those are two of the big ones, forget about it. Even if you're on the base, you're not getting it unless you're and I was there as a civilian, but I couldn't get dental work when I was in Japan. And so I was talking to my, fellow coworkers. I'm like, "Hey, what do you guys do if you got to get dental work, or if you need an MRI?" or a CAT scan. They said, oh, we fly to Thailand.
Yeah.
And people go to Thailand and they get excellent dental work. I mean, I'm talking like, a full brand new set of teeth in your mouth, for
Yeah.
a couple $100. If you need an MRI, $100. And it's excellent, an excellent work being done. So the question becomes is why is that? And it's because they don't have all of these restrictions. And so you've got multiple people that can, create competition and drive those prices down. And those that are efficient and that do the job well, they stay in business. Those that are overcharging or that aren't doing the job well, they lose their business.
That's exactly right.
And to me, healthcare is no different. If you look at, and by the way, not just healthcare, but also education. When you look at the two industries most controlled by the U.S. government, it's healthcare and education.
Right.
And what are the two most screwed up industries? Healthcare and education. It tells you everything you need to know about why we don't want the government, basically interfering with the free market. I'm not opposed necessarily to, the government having regulations for safety and, and standards and things like that.
Right.
But this is different. This is clearly designed, to inhibit competition and fair competition. And the word con, that right there says everything you need to know.
It does. And I think that's an important point because we're not talking about rolling back safety regulations. So we're talking about the government asking the government for permission to actually go and have a healthcare related business. So, and that's where it gets a little confusing sometimes. So I want to be clear on that. What we're talking about is not rolling back regulations in terms of safety. We're talking about whether a person should be able to compete in the market. And I'll tell you what, I've seen it in the legislature. There are so many lobbyists that are involved with this that are doing very well just because of the status quo. You have
that was the question I was going to ask about, was the lobbying that goes on and the deal making that happens in the back rooms and all of that, because to me this seems like such a no-brainer. And why would why would you not be able to get this passed, or what would be the objection to it? The only thing that I can think of is that you've got people making money. You got people who are being benefited. You've got campaigns being financed. You've got, a whole host of other things, that are probably stopping this. And along with that, other things. And this isn't unique, right? This is a problem in general with, with the federal government, the federal legislature, as well as state legislatures. I do see this as a problem. Have you seen, this sort of thing happen? I mean, in your opinion, do you think that there are people who, are being pressured or being maybe influenced by, hey, vote this way for us and we'll make sure you get some cushy job on a, board of directors or something when you leave office?
Well, I don't have firsthand knowledge about that. So, but what I do know is that there is a lot of pushback when it comes from the lobbyists when it comes to this. And one of the things that I bring up to them is, I don't know if you remember this, a number of years ago, the hospital in Fairmont closed, and eventually they brought some things. It was brought back to an extent, but the hospital in Fairmont closed down. And one of the arguments that I put forth on that to certain individuals down in the legislature was that, look, had we not had certificate of need, maybe this particular hospital could have expanded and done other services. Look, you are even the ones that are in existence right now. If they want to expand into something, they literally have to get the permission from the government.
Yeah. Or you may have a competitor that, decides this other, company or this other hospital is doing a terrible job. And we think we could do it better and cheaper. And they start up and then the other one fails because maybe they're not managing, their finances properly, or they're not managing their company well. The other company is there. There's so many things involved in this that it has impacts on. One of the things that just it really frustrates me is that mental health care.
Yeah.
Good luck if I've got a son with autism and special needs, and trying to find somebody that can work with him, in the Eastern Panhandle of all places, has been damn near impossible.
Yes.
There's been very little choices, and so we've had to drive all the way down to an hour away down to Virginia, yeah, and to find a neurologist, or we've had to go out to to Monongalia County up in Morgantown, and that just ain't right. It shouldn't be that way.
That's right. I mean, people should not have to be going out of state for medical services. And
Mhm.
if we were to institute these reforms, I think what you would see is a lot of people would step up, and the cost, not just in terms of availability of
Mhm.
services, but the cost of services would be more likely to go down. I think
Yeah.
that's what you would see if we were to reform certificate of need in West Virginia.
Yeah, definitely. If the con laws were repealed, obviously there would be. What do you think would be the challenges, kind of immediately, and what do you think the benefits would be long term?
Well, the challenges immediately would be in terms of there would be a time in which there probably would be some uncertainty
Hmm.
in terms of what, but going forward into the future, what I think you would have is I think you would have more options. I think you would have more businesses wanting to open up in West Virginia.
Hmm.
I had one discussion, and I can't go into a whole lot of details, but I know a few years ago there was a company that was wanting to set up in West Virginia, but the process was just wasn't worth it for them to expand into West Virginia. I'm
Hmm.
talking about a product that would have been monumental to many West Virginians, and this company bypassed it. They said, no,
Wow.
we're not. If you can pass certificate of need, yeah, we're going to strongly consider and maybe even definitely move into West Virginia. But I think what you're going to have going into the future is that costs are going to be lowered for West Virginians. I think
Hmm.
what you're gonna have less people having to go out of state for services. I think these are the two things long term that you're going to see if we can enact reform of our certificate of need laws.
So one of the things that I learned through my experience of running was that, as a citizen, we have a lot of ability to do things that I don't think most people realize.
Hmm.
In the case of my campaign, everywhere I went, people kept talking about parental rights,
Hmm.
and so I said, well, why don't we just write a law, find a sponsor, and submit it? And we found that it was effective. We actually were able to do that. We were able to get the House to support it. Unfortunately, it made it into the Senate and it died in committee.
Yeah.
But we're going to try it again, because what we found was that, number one, I learned a very valuable lesson, which is that you got to make sure you got your allies both in the House and in the Senate,
Hmm.
and so that way, because it's got to pass on both sides. The other thing, though, is that I learned that we can do more than just bitch and complain. We can actually, there's a lot of things that you guys have, on your plate, a lot of priorities, and if we can make life easier by presenting something that's well articulated,
Hmm.
and then and help to write it, and because that's what lobbyists do, right? you know,
Yep.
and then we present that to you, and if it makes sense, the likelihood of getting something like that passed, I would say, is a lot higher.
Oh
Um,
no, I think absolutely. I'll just tell you, Nate, it's incredibly important going in that you don't just all of a sudden in the middle of the legislature, you just
mhm,
come up with an idea and then you ask a legislator to introduce it. Yeah, I mean, there's a very good chance that, I mean, a legislator is going to be able to introduce it, but you've got to have a plan in place. You've got to have
mhm,
the opportunity to educate legislators on the legislation. It's much more likely
absolutely.
to be introduced if you have a plan in place and that you start working it very early in the process rather than just waiting until the last minute. Because really, I
So,
mean, the practical matter is that the only bills introduced at the very end of the session, 9 times out of 10, are the ones that
mhm,
the special interests want. All
yeah.
the other ones that are the kind of bills that are important to me and you, those bills take strategy and it takes working months in advance to get it through.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, obviously, you're passionate about these two issues.
Mhm.
I'm assuming that you're probably already working on, trying to get folks to, to push forward these bills. I mean, you have relationships with people in the House.
Mhm.
How can we, as West Virginia citizens, help you to get this thing pushed through? What can we do to assist you? Is it a matter of calling our legislators and saying, hey, we want you to support this bill? Or is it a matter of, like what I did, we went down there and we actually, we got a permit to set up in both rotundas during a special session. And when you guys were coming out of, special session, we had all of the pornographic books basically in all of our libraries on the table, so we could pull you over and say, hey, we want you to see what is in these books. Is there something like that we could do down at the state capitol and bring, so when you guys are coming out of session, we can show you, hey, we want you to take a look at this bill. We'd like you to sign that you'll support it. We'd like to know, because I found that sending people emails and making phone calls, that can be effective, but it's far more effective when you are talking to them face to face and you can show them, in writing and see their reaction and read their reaction and express to them how important this is.
No, I think so. I think being in person. Also, too, I think if all you can do, because look, there's a lot of people out there that might not have the ability to get down there to the legislature. Even if you can make calls, legislators down there, they do read their emails and they do generally listen to their calls. They might not call you back, but there are discussions that happen about, I'm getting all these calls about this issue or that issue. People talk about that. So I think making calls, being down there, and then figuring out who the key individuals are that are going to be important to that bill. So for example, what will happen is, generally speaking, is when a bill is introduced, it'll be referred to one or more committees. If you can somehow get to a committee chair, then I think it's going to be much more likely to get on the agenda, and figuring out, and a lot of times it takes some legwork, figure out who the key pushers and the key movers are in terms of certain issues, just like the chairs of the relevant committees.
Is that why bills die sometimes in committee? Is that it's just not the priority of the committee chair?
Exactly. Yeah. The committee chairs have an incredible amount of power. I typically introduce, 80 bills per year, and just a handful get put on an agenda. That was my experience. And it's just because now a lot of the bills that I do are a little bit more controversial. They shouldn't be, but they tend to be more controversial. So I get it. They're not, if it's just a bill that doesn't really matter that much to anybody and is not controversial, it's much more likely to get on an agenda.
Sure.
But you have to be able to get to those committee chairs. And then also too, depending on the issue, finding groups that you're aligned with.
Right.
Okay. If you can find groups that are,
I'm glad you said that, because that was my next question to you. Like, I think of certificate of need, and there's some groups that I would naturally think would be in alignment with getting rid of it. One of those might be the health freedom advocates. They're obviously their issues are maybe not directly related to, but it's still an issue of health freedom. We don't want, if there's a, say, alternative medicine or, a acupuncturist or, some other, type of medicine that we would like to see, we don't want there being restrictions or people saying, oh, you can't have this here. We can't expand services here. None of that. And so I would think that there's a huge group of people that are, health freedom, West Virginia Health Freedom Coalition, that I think would be, aligned with this.
Absolutely. That would be one. I think there are other groups too. I think the Cardinal Institute, which is West Virginia's only right of center think tank, I think they would support this. I think they would be strong advocates of this sort of reform. I think that Americans for Prosperity would be on board.
Yeah, free markets, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there's several members down there that are a part of what's called the Hazlitt Coalition, which is a group of liberty-minded legislators that are aligned with Young Americans for Liberty and are endorsed by them. And so there are a number of groups and organizations that I think would be on the same page in terms of reform, making the reforms that we would want on this.
The other issue that you brought up about the property forfeiture, I would think a good strategy in that might be, approaching like some of your sheriff's associations and things like that, and getting them on board with it, so that you go to members of the House or the Senate and you say, hey, this is supported by law enforcement. So
Right.
don't tell me that this is a problem for law enforcement, and
Yep.
maybe it's a harder sell for them, but at the same time, if they are liberty-minded individuals that love the Constitution, they should be all for it, because we're not talking about doing away with it. We're talking about reforming it so that unless somebody's convicted, we're not going to take their stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I think that would be a great strategy. We just need to figure out ways to build alliances. I mean, up to this point, there have been groups like the NRA and the West Virginia Citizens Defense League that have been monumental in passing pro-Second Amendment legislation. I think
That's another group, right? Because how often do guns, get confiscated, in a raid on a home? Look, I had I was a protected whistleblower, and I had the FBI come into my home. They lied on a search warrant to be able to come into my home. And the first thing that they did when I was presented with the search warrant was, where are your guns? My guns were nowhere on that search warrant, but they wanted to see them. And then he had me hand them to him, that was a whole nother, dangerous situation.
Wow.
But they wrote down the serial numbers of all of my guns.
Gosh.
And so of course I don't want those guns anymore. I sold them all, and replaced them. But it's like, I can only imagine that there's a number of things like that where, things get taken, that shouldn't be, and so I would think, the NRA or the West Virginia Citizens Defense League, or, what's the other one? You've got Gun Owners Association of America. Those all might be great organizations to get in there to support that issue, because it doesn't just affect the state. If we've got a state law that says, hey, this is a part, we have a constitutional issue here, and we are creating this state law to make sure the Constitution is being followed. If the feds come in and try to do it, we now at least have some sort of justification, to sue the feds over it.
Yes.
And I think that's important as well.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100%.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, how can, obviously coming on shows like this, I think is a good thing, because you're able to get this information out to people that otherwise might not have heard it. But what other things can state leaders do to help bring more awareness of these issues, and what steps should be taken to make real change in these areas moving forward?
Well, number one, organization. Everybody has to get organized. If these are issues that are important to you, get organized. I mean, a lot of times people don't understand that it doesn't take that much if you're organized to accomplish things. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the 3% rule. And the 3% rule it's this concept that, look, if you want to enact major societal change, all it takes is 3% of the population.
Yep. Going back to the American Revolution.
Absolutely. Going back to the American Revolution. Right.
Yeah.
And the same principle applies throughout history in terms of even civil rights movements throughout the history of the United States. If you can get 3% of the population invested in something, active on something, I'm not talking about just going on Twitter or something and talking about something. I'm talking about being actively involved in an issue. You can make a huge difference. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that you can do too is, and I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about actually supporting legislators that you align with on these issues. And there are a number of issues that are aligned on these issues. If you can do that and help them, I mean, people who are going to stand up for freedom, stand up for free market capitalism, align with those people and volunteer your time. I mean, if you're talking, I mean, the lower you go in terms of a level of government, the more impactful you can be.
That is so important. Listen, folks, you have very little ability to impact who's going to be the president. You have very little ability to impact who's going to be even your congressman or your state or your federal senator, right? But when it comes to your state legislature, that is where you have impact. There are people in the state legislature, for one thing, they're way more accessible. I can't tell you the number of times I've reached out to Shelley Moore Capito or Mooney and not gotten any response at all, right? But that rarely ever happens when I reach out to state legislators. I get responses back, and usually they're very happy to hear from me because they want to know, that people they're in the business of obviously wanting to get reelected, and they want to know that people are paying attention to what they're doing. And so I think that's a very important thing, and I think people do need to be engaged. Unfortunately, most people I don't even think know who their representative or their state senator is. And and I'll be honest with you, up until I decided to run for Congress, I didn't even know those things because it wasn't even on my purview of what they even do, especially in a state like West Virginia where they're part-time. So, but what I found is that so much of the problems that people would bring to my attention were issues that weren't even federal issues. They were issues that could be solved, through the state legislature. And so we have such an ability to impact things and really make change there. And so I would encourage people to, number one, learn who your representative and your and your senator is. Find out who they are. And then when you do find out who they are, check out and see what bills that they've sponsored. Look and see, what they're about. Because oftentimes, unlike, a federal campaign where there might be a lot of money in advertising and all that, there's not a lot of that goes on at the state legislature level. So oftentimes you don't know what they're running on because you may not be getting, things in the mail, but you have the ability to reach out to them. And if they're responsive, and if they listen to you and you're bringing up valid issues, and I always, I go with the mantra that I learned in the military, which is never bring a problem, to somebody's attention without a solution, So, if you have something you're complaining about, think about if you were in their shoes, what would you do to fix it? And then call them, contact them, suggest that. And, and if maybe they got a better idea, or maybe they understand things better than you do and can explain to you, why that would be a hard thing, to get accomplished. But we have the power. It's in our hands, and we really can make a big difference. So I really am grateful for you coming on here and talking about this and sharing the stuff. So I've got to cut to another commercial break, but when I get back, I want to talk about what you're doing now and what your future plans are here as you're, no longer part of the state legislature. So, okay. Folks, we're going to cut to another commercial break, but we will be right back after a short message. So stick with us.
Increasing expenses have caused us all a lot of pressure these days, and it's affecting even the wealthiest of people. Most have lost their sense of security, stability, and even hope for a strong financial future. The game plan of everyone in your cell phone has likely been disrupted or even hardcore stopped, and most are looking for a creative solution to regain financial momentum. Oftentimes, life's best solutions are the simplest. But first, a question. What is something most people think they should own but don't? Crypto, fine art, real estate? Nope. We are talking about real money. The kind kings and queens fought for and large institutions today buy in mass. We're talking about gold and silver, assets that provide confidence in tough financial situations. So the question is, do you own any? If you don't, you're not alone. Most people aren't maximizing the power of precious metals because it's just been too complicated. And even though they see advertisements about gold and silver daily, they don't really know who to trust. That is, until now. The bottom line is that buying gold and silver doesn't have to be complicated or scary. There's a simple, better way to accumulate assets and create financial peace, headache-free. And this very minute, a new community of average people are seeing above-average results to the tune of tens of millions in assets over the last few years. This system is tested, it's simple, and it's not an experiment. To date, it's helped more than 80,000 people bring hope back into their lives. It's invitation only, and right now, this new community has accepted a challenge to give away as much free gold this year as possible. Curious? Learn how to get your free gold today. Check out the next step to get the details.
Welcome back to the Mountain State edition of the Raising Cain Show. And we've been talking with former Representative Chris Pritt here about these issues of civil asset forfeiture and the reforms that need to happen there, as well as the certificate of need, and talking about just generally what we need to be doing as citizens to be more active and engaged with our state legislatures. And this really applies to everybody, not just here in West Virginia, but everywhere, because look at all of the things that happened with, and I'll give you an example. Look at what happened with the, with the presidential elections in 2020 and all of the lawsuits that were brought at the federal level. And what did the court say? They came back and said, deal with this at the state level because it's a state issue. And there's a lot of issues like that that really have to be dealt with at our state legislatures level. And so it's important that we take an active role in that, folks, and make sure, that we are engaged and active and doing our part as citizens. Before we get back into our discussion, I do want to make one mention of the advertisement that just ran for 7K Metals. If you go to 7kmetals.com/Raising Cain, you can find out more about this great opportunity. What I love about this company is that they actually focus on the little guy. They're not like one of these companies where they expect you to spend thousands of dollars to be able to, buy gold and silver. No, you can buy as little as one coin a month, and they have programs set up to be able to do that. I'm a member of that so that I can get, silver coins that come and they're beautiful, and or you can just get bullion if that's what you want. But go to their website and check it out. And if it sounds like something that you'd be interested in, then sign up. Again, it's something that helps us and helps our show here. So Chris, you are no longer in the state legislature, but tell me, what, obviously you're still involved and you're still engaged. So what are your next steps, that you plan to take in advocating for these reforms, and how can we get involved in helping you to push for change?
Oh, sure. Well, actually, I don't think I'm quite out of the game quite yet. Most likely, the reason I say that is I took on an incumbent in the primary this past May for the state Senate. Unfortunately, that did not work out, and that's the reason I left the House of Delegates, as I took on an incumbent Republican senator. It didn't work out. However, that incumbent Republican senator has been appointed to be Secretary of Revenue. So that means there's going to be a vacancy. So there's a very good chance I'm going to be applying for that vacancy. The way it works in West Virginia is that there are individuals within the Republican Party infrastructure that select 3 names, and those names would go to the governor, and then the governor would pick the replacement. Now, in my case, this is the only instance where this would apply. The county executive committee of my county would be responsible for selecting the 3 names, and those 3 names would go to the governor. So I'm going to be most likely applying for that. And and if it works out, then I'm going to be in the state Senate here in another month. I'm most likely I'm leaning in that direction. But if regardless of whether I go after that appointment or not, I'm going to continue to be talking about these issues, talking about liberties for all West Virginians, and encouraging others to get involved with the process. There's ways you can do it. If you don't like what your legislator is doing, I mean, and in particular on the level of House of Delegates, I'm firmly convinced that if you have the right organization and you have the right message, anybody in the House of Delegates can be successfully challenged. Anyone. So if you do not like what your legislator is doing, give serious thoughts about actually challenging them. And a lot of people want to go the route of actually running as a third party. I think that's, frankly, in my opinion, a waste of time. If you want to take somebody on, do it within the primary, okay? Because there are people who would listen. I mean, there are activists within the Republican Party that are trying to push the Republican Party in a more liberty-oriented direction. There are. I mean, you've got your establishment rhinos, but you also have good, hardworking, everyday West Virginians that are a part of the Republican Party that are trying to reform it. I mean,
that's a good point you made. And I want to just point something out on that. When you think about third parties may work in some states where you have, a more, uh, you know, split vote or level playing field or a lot of independents. Like think of places like, Vermont, whatever, we have a lot of people that are independent voters up there. We don't have a lot of that here in West Virginia.
Mhm.
Mostly what you have here is Republicans. I mean, this is a solid red state. There's a few outliers, that in some of the, like bigger cities and stuff. But the reality is that if you want to change, if you are a conservative, you need to change the Republican Party. You need to, get involved in the Republican Party and push for that change. And that's really where you're going to have the most impact and the most ability, to be able to have a shot at doing something. And I would agree with you 100%. The only thing I wish was different, and unfortunately, it just is the way it is that oftentimes people will vote, straight party ticket in their, in their general election, but a lot of people don't vote in the primaries.
Right.
The difference is, and I will say this, and I look at guys like, you look at like Chris Rose, and winning his Senate seat. He didn't have a lot of money.
Right.
Tom Willis, same thing, and he beat out an incumbent that was the Senate president. So it is possible, folks, but in the state legislature, you got to be willing to go out and knock on doors, and you got to be willing to go and talk to the people. I was running for a federal position. It's a little harder to do that. 700,000 people, not really possible. You do need the money, in order to be able to win in that race, mainly because you got to be able to get direct mailers to people's homes.
Right.
But if you are running for the state legislature, it is still possible to win without a lot of financial backing, as long as you have good ideas, you have respect for the people, you're willing to knock on their door and talk to them and listen to them. That right there, it's interesting. Everywhere I did knock on doors, and I did a lot of door knocking, but it just was not enough to really put a dent. But everywhere I did, I won those precincts.
Mm-hmm.
So, even though I lost to Riley Moore, in my own, county, I came in second, and I didn't have, a lot of money. I was going up against 5 other people, but I came in second, and it was a close second. And I think it was largely, when you look at the map at a precinct level, every single one of the precincts that I knocked on doors, I won those precincts. So,
Well,
it matters.
absolutely. No, I think it does. But to put it in perspective too, if you're going to do it, and to have any chance of winning at all, you have to be all in for up to a year prior to the primary.
I was in for 2 years.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you mean. You've got to be willing to go and spend your time. It's not. It may be a part-time position as a state legislature, but you're going to be full-time, campaigning.
Oh yeah,
And,
you're talking
and
like
that's
as
the
soon as
truth of
you,
it.
yes, like as soon as you get off of work,
Mhm.
then until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, every single weekend, all of that. That's what it would
Yeah.
take. I mean,
I
that's
gave
what it
I
takes.
gave up my summer of spending my days on the river, which I missed. But
Yeah.
I will tell you, it was, even though I didn't win, it was the most fulfilling time that I've had in a very long time. Just getting to know the people of West Virginia, and and having I developed so many personal relationships with so many great people. It engaged me. I'm forever changed. I will never be the same person who is not engaged with my, state and my local, legislators. I contact, senators and delegates all the time now,
Yeah.
and talk to them about different things that are going on. And I have great relationships now because of it. And
Mhm.
so it is a great, politics is a dirty business. It's not for
Yes.
everybody, but you can you can maintain your integrity and still run for office, and and outshine other people who are running by just being a good person, and doing doing your due diligence to make sure that you're listening to the needs of the people that you're hoping to represent. So
Well, and I'll just mention this as well. When you talk about how you ran, and you weren't able to get across the finish line, just keep in mind, Nate, my first time running, I didn't win either. I mean,
Mhm.
I ran and I lost, but I came back another time, and I was fortunately able to run. So sometimes it just takes persistence. It takes year
Yeah.
after year. You just got to come back. You can't just give up. And
Yeah.
that's how you're ultimately able to get past the establishment who are going to be working against you.
Yeah,
I think that's what you
definitely.
have to do.
Definitely. And, and this show has been this show really came as an outcrop of, I spent all this time getting to know people, developing a voice and, on issues. And I thought, well, how can I continue to do that even though, I didn't get elected? And that's partly why I started the show was, number one, if I do ever decide to run again, and I haven't committed to doing that, honestly, I do think it's something that people should pray about. And, they need to make sure they got the support of their spouse and all of that. And we took 2 years off to really, focus on campaigning. But if I ever run again, hopefully through this show, people will know who I am, and
Yes.
it will build that name recognition to make it a little bit easier. And not to mention, I'm also connecting with great people like you and others, throughout West Virginia, and being able to know about these issues that are going on and staying engaged and staying connected, I think is a really important part of that. So I appreciate you coming on the show here and
Sure.
spending this time with me. The last thing I want to ask, and this is something I kind of always try to do, for all of my guests, is we've talked about a lot of different things, and but mainly, the two big issues, and which being the certificate of need and the reforms on the it's right on the tip of my tongue. Forfeiture, asset
Yes.
forfeiture.
Yes.
My question to you is this: out of people have short attention spans. They might forget about those issues, or maybe one of those issues isn't as important to them as the other, or whatever. But you have an opportunity right now. We've got over 1,000 people right now live watching.
Okay.
What do you want people to take away from this conversation?
Well, look, what I would like people to take away from this conversation is that we have laws on the books in West Virginia and other states that significantly limit your freedom. We're talking about laws that you might not even think about on a day-to-day basis, but eventually it could impact you. Okay, that's the reason we're trying to reform things like certificate of need and civil asset forfeiture. At some point, you could be in that position. You could be an innocent bystander, and your property gets taken when you have committed no crime. And that's the reason we're trying to do these sorts of reforms. Just as you look at what they did to President Trump, it's possible that in 15, 20 years from now, the wrong people get in office and there could be actions taken against you to take your property. That's what civil asset forfeiture reform is all about. When it comes to reform of our certificate of need laws, it's about freedom. It's about being able to start a business in West Virginia without first seeking the approval of the government. That's just wrong. You shouldn't have to do it. I mean, the same rules that apply to other kinds of businesses are the same rules that should apply to healthcare businesses. You shouldn't have to ask the government for permission. And that's the reason our country, we were founded on liberty and free market principles. Enshrined in our Constitution is all of that. And even if you look at the Interstate Commerce Clause, the reason that was put in place is that the founders wanted us to have a national economy. Okay, that's important. The free market is incredibly important. And we shouldn't have it just if you want to open up an auto body shop or you want to open up a grocery store. It should apply to all legal, legitimate businesses like healthcare. People should not have to ask the government for permission. And the results are right before us of having laws like this. Higher costs, less choice, having to go to Ohio, the Cleveland Clinic, other places to get your health care. That shouldn't be the case. And if we institute these very, very basic reforms, I mean, as simple as repealing our certificate of need statute, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see lower costs, and you're going to see individuals here in the Mountain State not have to go across the border as much to get health care.
Amen to that. You remind me also of the insurance issue. Of course, this is a federal issue, but the fact that insurance companies, that they are limited to certain regions, which just is ridiculous. That is just one more barrier, to us having, cost affordable, healthcare.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much, for coming on the show. I always acknowledge that we have our part to do, but we also need God's help. Our founders understood this important principle of providence. And so I always like to end my show with prayer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you so much, God, for the amazing miracle of us being born in a country where we have the right to speak up, where we have the right to run for office, where we have a democratic form of government, this constitutional republic. Lord, I pray that you would not allow us to take that for granted, but Lord, that you would spur us on in our hearts to get engaged and to be involved. I thank you, Lord, for Chris's service to this state, Lord, and I just pray you'd bless him, Lord, in his endeavor and to run for this position that is opening up, Lord, in the state Senate. Pray that your hand would be upon him. And Lord, I just thank you for everything that you are doing in this country right now with the election of Trump and the people that he is picking and putting in place. I pray that you would give wisdom to him and into our our federal legislature, as well as our state legislature and our new governor, and those that are going to be making decisions that are going to affect us. Lord, I pray that you would give them wisdom and that you would help them to make the right decisions and help us to engage with them, Lord, respectfully, and help us to be a better citizenry for it. We just ask for your hand of blessing on our nation and on our state of West Virginia. Help us to overcome the challenges that we have set before us. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, Chris, where can people reach out to you and contact you if they would like to get a hold of you to help on these issues?
Oh, sure. Well, my email address is really, really simple. It's chris@chrispritt.com. That's a great way to get a hold of me. Also, on most of my social media, my handle is really, really simple. It's Pritt for the people. That's Pritt, the number 4, the people. So people can reach out to me, inbox me, email me, however they would like to contact me. I'd be happy to open up a conversation to move our state and country forward.
That's great. That's great. And where's your law offices out of?
Charleston.
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 All right. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm gonna have to give you a call. I got a couple issues right now that I'd like to talk to you about.
Sure thing.
But anyhow, look, folks, you can also find me on social media at Nate Cain for WV. I'm pretty much on everything, and that's the easiest way to find me. But also, you can catch this show as well as all the other shows that I do, including my radio program and the Substack articles that I publish on the Raising Cain Show.com. Remember to stay vigilant, stay active, and may God bless you, and may God bless our country and, of course, West Virginia. Have a good night.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.